Welcome once again to Lehto's Law. Here's Steve Lehto.
Caleb sent me a note, and this is pretty interesting. 3 seconds of audio could end up costing Fox $500,000. Now, I saw that headline. My first thought was, wow, what could that possibly be? But then my background, having worked in radio as a disc jockey, I thought to myself, I wonder if that has to do with the emergency broadcast system. And it does. And that, kids, is why we don't play the emergency alert system tone on TV. So they now call it the emergency alert system, but they used to call it the emergency broadcast system. But that's the thing you hear from time to time, where they'd play this screeching sound over the radio or the television, and they would say, this is only a test. But if it had not been a test, you would have been notified of a few things you need to know about, blah, 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 blah. But this has only been a test. We now resume our regular broadcasting. And I remember seeing that on television, I remember hearing it on the radio, but I also remember being the one running the test when I worked in the radio station. And we'd get a notice, and the notice would come over the wire, and it would say, you are to run this test at this time, and log the fact that you ran the test. So this is all about, it goes back to the Cold War, okay? But Richard Curry writes a story for TheRegister.com. Despite being a well-known illegal sound that many film and television productions have been fined over, U.S. media titan Fox stands accused of playing the emergency alert system attention tone to promote an NFL show on dozens of TV channels. So that sound, that screeching sound, by the way, it's actually a very specific sound that they're making, and it's a sound that would never occur naturally. That's why it grinds on your eardrums, okay? The FCC does police use of that sound because they want to protect its integrity. They want that sound to be something that people go, oh, that's that sound, I must pay attention. And it gets watered down if it's used inappropriately. So they want to fine Fox $504,000, and just in case you weren't aware of this, they had previously already fined a movie maker for making Olympus Has Fallen and using that sound. And apparently they also fined Jimmy Kimmel Live because he used the sound back in 2019, for which he was charged $395,000. And that's a scary concept because the FCC will often fine you for doing something and then multiply it for how many outlets you did it on. So let's suppose you had a syndicated radio show, and the show is on 15 stations, and you do something wrong during the show. They might say that's one violation times 15 and charge you that way. So even if you use it for comedic purposes, the FCC doesn't care. During the Cold War, the last time people genuinely feared that someone else might, end the world, the government devised a radio system to alert the entire country to a disaster, whether man-made or otherwise. So that began in 1951 as the Control of Electromagnetic Radiation System, or CONELRAD, where air defense control centers would transmit a message to key radio stations around the country by special telephone lines. That was the old system. These stations would then alert smaller radio stations, which would begin broadcasting the message and then go offline. Back when they would do the previous one where they notified the radio stations, the stations broadcasting it would then change their frequency to either 640 or 1240, which was supposed to be some kind of way of fooling enemy bombers if they were using radio stations as beacons. But that system with the radio stations was unwieldy and eventually got replaced in 1963 with the Emergency Broadcast System, which is the one I was more familiar with, the EBS. Now it's called the EAS, the Emergency Alert System, and it can take over practically any television or radio station in the United States. The FEMA National Radio System delivers a message from the White House to the National Public Warning System, which is a network of 77 radio stations across the country. These stations send the messages to nearby radio and TV broadcasters, which are legally required by the FCC to pick up and start delivering the message themselves as soon as received. So I never saw an actual message come over. I only saw the tests. So what would happen is they'd send you things saying, this is the test, go, and they tell you to do the test. But I never actually saw such an alert come over. So the message is in the form of an emergency action notification, which has 3 sections. The header contains information about the origin of the alert and the nature of the disaster. Then the attention signal, the sound, which is two simultaneous tones at 853 and 960 hertz. And the whole point is to get your attention. And then it's followed by a voice message describing the event. The use of the sound is prohibited to prevent people becoming desensitized to something you should only hear in the most dire circumstances. You are supposed to actually hear the sound and go, oh, it must be an emergency. So you don't hear the sound and go, oh, it's Sunday Night Football. To preserve the unique purpose and effectiveness of the tones, the Commission enforces laws that prohibit their use or simulation except for specific permitted uses. According to the FCC's Notice of Apparent Liability for Forfeiture, Fox admitted using a 3-second clip of the attention tone pulled off of YouTube in a short comedic advertisement for an upcoming game aired as part of the Fox NFL Sunday pregame show. That was back in November of 2021, by the way. We told you the FCC wouldn't find it funny. We find Fox responsible for broadcasting the promotional segment containing the EAS tones on 18 of its owned and operated broadcast stations, transmitting the promotional segment to 190 of its network-affiliated television broadcast stations, and causing the transmission of the promotional segment on Fox Sports Radio and the Fox Sports on XM channel on Sirius XM radio, the satellite radio. It added that the promotional segment's comedic tone also did not alter or neutralize its overall effect of falsely warning listeners and viewers of non-existent emergency, as the EAS tones were clearly audible, cognizable, and appropriate for non-emergency use. The manner of appropriation of the EAS tones is exactly the type of simulation the Commission's rules seek to address and prohibit in order to avoid diluting the real meaning of those tones over time. Therefore, the regulator deemed Fox's ad to be an egregious and willful violation of FCC rules and proposed a forfeiture of $504,000. They proposed it. It's nowhere near the bill for running an ad during Super Bowl or indeed in space, but it is a good chunk of change. So it's kind of an unusual thing because so few people think about this on a daily basis, I would assume. But the tones are, again, at 853 and 960 hertz. And the real question is, could you simulate something that sounds sort of like it, but isn't it? Like, what if you ran it, say, 845 and 925? Because the whole point behind those tones is that they're very, very dissonant. The two tones don't belong together. It's like the old screeching or the fingernails on a chalkboard thing. And so it does get your attention, and it cuts through everything. It doesn't matter what's happening noise-wise where you are. That tone will cut through that and hit your ear, and you'll go, oh, there's that tone. Something might be going on. I got to go take a look, take a listen. So it does harken back to my days in radio, and I remember this. And the weird thing is I worked at radio stations where at one point in time the tones were on carts, meaning that you could just take a cart. I actually just had this out yesterday. Cartridges in the radio stations look kind of like this. This is an 8-track, but they had carts in radio stations, and you stuck them with cart players, and they had songs on them or commercials on them. And I remember they actually had a cart that actually had the tones on it. And there was something about the tones coming off a cart that wasn't considered quite as good as the tones that are generated by a tone generator. And I remember working at radio stations that actually had a rack-mounted device that was just there to generate those tones. So if there had been an actual emergency, you'd actually fire up that device and play the tones as required by the FCC or whoever else is out there. So that's what's going on there, but it does look like Fox is going to get hit for a $504,000 forfeiture. They don't call it a fine, they call it a forfeiture. $504,000. And they say it was for 3 seconds. 3 seconds of that tone. But the FCC doesn't mess around. And they say that tone is sacred. You only use that tone for emergencies or drills, when you're drilling for the emergency. And I can't remember the last time I heard it on the radio or on any other device I was using. It's been a while. But I know that when I worked in radio, they would come across seemingly often enough to, had another test today. I remember those. So, of course, that was a long time ago. Haven't been a disc jockey probably for 20 years or so. But there you go, from the register.com. Caleb, thanks for sending it. Great story. $500,000 Fox has got to forfeit for using 3 seconds of the emergency tone, 3 seconds of audio, which will end up costing them all that money. Questions or comments, put them below. Let's talk to you later. Bye-bye.
Thank you for watching Lehto's Law. One of the keys to happiness is patience.